Welcome to the Heart of It, where we take you to the heart of healthcare. This season, we're exploring what happens behind the scenes at Fraser Health to ensure patients receive the best care possible. Fraser Health provides care on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded lands of the Coast Salish and Inklakatma nations and is home to 32 First Nations within the Fraser Salish region. Fraser Health is dedicated to serving all Indigenous people and honors the unique cultures of the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit living within the Fraser Salish region.
Hi there, welcome to another special episode of The Heart of It. Today I'm really thrilled to be joined by Bob Thirsk and Dave Williams, both of whom are retired astronauts and physicians actually, and really privileged to have the opportunity to speak with you today. Bob, we had the privilege of meeting earlier in the year, and Bob was born in the Fraser Health region, actually, in New West, in fact, and holds the Canadian record for most time spent in space at over 204 days. He's a former engineer and family physician and currently serves as a director on several social purpose organizations. And Dave, we haven't had the privilege of meeting prior to this podcast, but he's an emergency physician prior to becoming an astronaut. And we're needing emergency physicians more than ever. So would love to hear a little bit of your insights in that area as we speak a bit further. And you hold the Canadian spacewalking record, which I didn't know until I learned a little bit more about you, which is more than 17 hours. And you're currently at University of Toronto and McGill University as adjunct professor of surgery, from my understanding. And so privileged to have both of you today. Welcome.
Thank you.
Well, thanks very much for having us.
Well, I'd love to first hear about what led you to the kind of career of being an astronaut, because just from my naivete and ignorance, I didn't really know that astronauts had so many different types of backgrounds prior to becoming an astronaut. I thought, this is complete ignorance on my end, but I thought astronauts had just trained to become astronauts through, usual like astrophysics, like engineering, those types of things. But then I learned that there's so many different backgrounds of people that actually become astronauts. So I'll start maybe with Dave and to hear about what made you become or pursue that path of becoming an astronaut.
Well, I had a dream of being an astronaut when I was a kid growing up in Montreal in the 1960s, but I was at McGill in medical school in 1983. That was when they had the first selection of Canadian astronauts, and Bob was applying at that time, and my wife said to me, "You should apply to this," and I kind of missed the application because I was studying for final exams and things, so I kept it in the back of my mind, saying, well, if they've hired now, maybe they'll hire a second group of astronauts. So I was part of the group that was hired in 1992 and joined the space program at that time. It was pretty a remarkable journey, as you can imagine.
Yes. And what about you, Bob?
Well, I'm similar vintage as Dave, and I grew up in this magical decade, the 1960s. And the 60s were an incredible decade because things were moving so fast on so many fronts in science and healthcare and civil rights and even entertainment, but most of all the space program. I don't remember the first human being flying into space. That happened in 1961 by Yuri Gagarin, a Russian cosmonaut. But I do remember only 8 years later, 2 people walked on the moon. And that evening, it was a Sunday evening, watching Neil and Buzz hop around on the moon doing their thing. That set a bit in my brain that if ever I had the opportunity to follow in their paths and explore the next frontier, I would want to do that. So a lot of good luck, a lot of nurturing by parents, by teachers, by professors who helped me pursue my dream. And then in 1983, 84, I was selected to the first original corps of Canadian astronauts.
And Victoria, really quickly, one of the
Yeah.
things we should share with you is in the selection in 1992, we had over 5,000 people apply. What's really cool about that is we had 600 applications from kids less than 10 years of age.
Oh my
And
God.
that to me is really inspiring because that represents the next generation, right?
Yes.
And you wonder where those kids are today and what they're up to.
Yeah, that's. I was like, first thing that came into my mind was maybe a little bit more competitive than getting into med school, or maybe not in terms of the numbers versus who gets in. But that's amazing because I know. I mean, as kids, a lot of kids think about going to space. The only thing that I really thought about when I was like that's tied to going to the moon or something was like maybe by the time I grow up, I'll be able to have my honeymoon on the moon or something silly like that. But I'd love to hear a little bit more about uh, Canada's space in space exploration because I didn't realize. Again, I'm going to own my ignorance here again. I didn't realize Canada had such a pivotal role in space exploration. So maybe I'll start with Bob and hear your thoughts on some of the history because I think a lot of Canadians actually don't have that background.
Yeah, so we are not NASA. We don't have unlimited resources to invest in discovery and innovation like some of the other countries do. But what we do well in a small number of niche areas, we do very well. So Canada has always pursued space activities, space initiatives that bring benefit back to citizens in Canada, bring benefit back to our economy and job creation. So we've excelled in certain niche areas. First of all, telecommunications. Canada is a geographically large country with a dispersed population, and we really need to stay in touch with all Canadians. So telecommunications satellites help us do that. Companies like Telesat are good examples. Secondly is remote sensing. Again, we've been blessed as a nation with wonderful natural resources. So forests, lakes, coastlines, but also agricultural resources and mineral resources. So we make use of remote sensing satellites, Earth observation satellites, to help scientists and economists and policymakers monitor our national resources and the resources around the world of our competitors. And then most recently, Canada excels in robotics. Back in the 1970s, NASA invited Canada to contribute a robotic arm to the space shuttle program. And we had some expertise residing at the National Research Council in Canada and elsewhere. So we got into space robotics, and we've continued to hold on to that torch with a robotic arm, also aboard the International Space Station. And then soon we will also have one on a mini space station that orbits the moon as well. So many wonderful spin-offs from our space application of robotics to healthcare, also the entertainment world as well. So Canada really tries to think carefully about what niche areas we want to invest in, what will bring benefit back to Canadians, and then we do it really, really well.
And the other big component of how Canada has contributed is through our people, right?
Dave was mentioning a few minutes ago that
Yes.
in the history of the Canadian astronaut program, we've had 10 or 12 astronauts now, I think, Dave. I can't remember exactly, but 4 of them are medical doctors.
Yes.
And so we've done a really good job explaining to Canadians why the educational path, why the formation of medical doctors has so much benefit to the job that astronauts need to do in space. I was just sort of thinking about my first year of astronaut training. It was very similar to first year of medical school. It's sort of like drinking from a fire hose. There's a lot of new information that needs to be gained. But having gone through the medical school experience, having developed some of the non-technical traits that stereotypically identify physicians, situational awareness, evidence-based decision-making, equanimity, traits like that are very, very helpful aboard a spacecraft.
Yeah, so it seems like training as a physician does help you become an astronaut. And what are like the specific things that you do as a physician in the outer space? Maybe I'll ask Dave to answer that. Sorry.
Sure, yeah. Um, Usually, when we fly in space as physicians, we become the de facto crew medical officer. And whether it's a short duration mission on the space shuttle or a longer duration mission on the International Space Station, we've always had crew medical officers on board to be able to provide medical support. Typically, the individuals that have been crew medical officers, they may have different backgrounds, so they're given appropriate medical training, probably equivalent to that of a basic EMT. And then when physicians fly in space, of course, we become the de facto crew medical officer. So both times I was in space, I was a crew medical officer. Both times I was in space, I treated my colleagues with medical procedures that I would be using in a primary care environment or potentially in the emergency room. Both times I was in space, we ran out of inventory because one of the big challenges with space medicine is having enough stuff in our pharmacy or with the equipment that we're using to be able to provide care for the crew members on board. And I think the lessons that we've learned in the delivery of space medicine will not only help us with remote medical care on Earth, as Bob was mentioning earlier, but they will be of critical importance to sending humans back to the moon. And of course, Canada was the third country to launch satellites into space. We're the second country to send humans to the moon, with Jeremy Hansen going to the moon as part of the Artemis II crew and Jenny Sidey as his backup. It's a really exciting time for Canadian space program.
Yeah, again, that like there's lots that Canadians should be actually proud of in terms of space exploration, and the linkage that Bob and you just mentioned, Dave, are around how space exploration also helps us to leapfrog some of the technological innovations. And Bob mentioned robotics, and of course, we are now starting to use robotics in day-to-day surgical setting. But can you walk us through, Dave, in terms of how those types of technologies get developed, and maybe start with robotics, and we can go to some of the other examples that we've seen?
Yeah, so in fact, the original surgical robots, there was a Computer Motion was one company that was developing a surgical robot, and then the Da Vinci surgical system, that was another one.
Yes.
They were offshoots of the DARPA research program in the US and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory with NASA. So arguably, space has driven the evolution of surgical robotics. In Canada, McDonald Detweiler worked with Dr. Garnet Sutherland, a neurosurgeon, to develop something called the NeuroArm, which is the world's only neurosurgical robot that can be used intraoperatively with MRI guidance. And that's really critical because now we can start to do image-guided neurosurgical interventions with the precision that robotics brings us. So space is a driver for the development of new technology, and the spacefaring nations of the world tend to have economies that are tied to innovation and implementation of new technologies as opposed to economies that are tied on consumerism.
Yeah, and you mentioned MRI guided, and I believe MRI and the technology also came from some of the space explorations initially as well. So, are there other examples of the technological leaps that we've made through space exploration, Bob?
Yeah, we're the next major destination in space, believe it or not, is going to be Mars. Mars is the astronaut's
Yes.
dream. We all hope to go to Mars in the next 15 years or
Yeah.
so. Because by understanding the geology of Mars, you can better understand the past, the present, and the future of Earth. And of course, we'd like to know if life ever existed on Mars and whether or not Mars could someday be a safe second home for humanity. But we cannot go to Mars today. There's a lot of technological and operational barriers that prevent us from going today. And I would say that the biggest hurdle are medical, healthcare delivery. How do you care for astronauts who are 400 million kilometers away from Earth, where the speed of sound introduces a 20-minute lag in the conversation between mission control on Earth and medical support and the crew on Mars? So we're starting to develop autonomous medical healthcare delivery technologies, point-of-care technologies, patient-centric technologies. So, for example, the Canadian Space Agency has already begun to develop some of these technologies. When David Saint-Jacques, the last Canadian astronaut to have flown in space, flew on the space station, he wore a wearable technology. He wore like a jumpsuit, and within the fabric of the jumpsuit were a number of physiological sensors that
Yes.
helped him to monitor his health. So heart rate, ECG, respiratory depth, respiratory rate, blood oxygen level, physical activity level, several other parameters as well. He wore this during the day, and of course, when he exercised, when he slept as well. And this is just an example of some of the kinds of technologies that the space program will hopefully spin off to terrestrial applications in remote healthcare in Canada's north, for example. Another point of care technology that David tested during his last spaceflight was what we call a bioanalyzer. It takes just a few droplets of blood, of urine or sputum, and can do cell counts, can do some protein biomarker measurements as well. And again, when you're on Mars, you're not going to be able to send urine and blood biospecimens back to Earth for analysis. You have to do it on site. So we're already testing out some of these prototype technologies, and the application on Earth is obvious.
Yes.
If you live in Vancouver, if you live in Victoria, if you live in Kelowna, you receive top-class, world-class healthcare and have wonderful access to it. But if you live in northern Canada, you do not have access to this kind of technology. So we're hoping to march a parallel path forward in space and also in remote underserved regions of Canada and elsewhere in the world as well to develop needed technologies.
That's a fascinating connection, right? That we're developing this kind of state-of-the-art technologies through space exploration needs and requirements, and then those applications can be then used pretty easily in some of the remote and I think also vulnerable parts of the world as well, right? And I think the other part that I was thinking about was around precision health and medicine, because astronauts need to be in top shape and health and wellness, and more we're growing into not just one treatment or one kind of wellness regime for all, but very personalized and precise measure to get there. And I think the sensors that you're talking about, Bob, kind of get us to that kind of trajectory. Curious, Dave, if you have any thoughts in this area.
Personalized medicine is something that we've embraced in the space program for quite a while.
Yes.
And it centers around the provision of what we might call countermeasures, or means by which we can prevent the muscle wasting that takes place in space, or the bone loss, or some of those other changes in the various organ systems. And if you think about the countermeasures that we implement, why would we implement the same exercise program for a 50-year-old female astronaut and a 50-year-old male astronaut? It doesn't make any sense at all. We need to have all of these individualized, and being able to develop individualized countermeasure programs based on people's normal physiology is something that we do routinely in the space program that arguably we're now seeing more and more in healthcare. And when we look at the drug dosing, for instance, between different genders, typically the dose is a dose. It doesn't matter what gender or age group you are or whatever. And we're now recognizing that there's a lot greater importance on individualized healthcare.
And there's longevity aspect of it too, right? Because of the impacts of space travel on your body. And again, there's lots of interest in that longevity aspects of health and wellness. So how does that tie in, Dave?
When I was between my first and my second space flight, I was director of life sciences at Johnson Space Center for about 4 years. During that time period, Senator Glenn flew in space at age 77 on his second space flight. And I was very much involved in that mission and the experiments that he did on board. He did a Canadian bone loss experiment in space. It was really quite remarkable.
Yeah.
When he landed, and I can share this with you because the data's been published, but when he landed, his rate of recovery was equivalent to that of about a 40-year-old astronaut. And
Really?
you can argue that maybe he's got great genetics or whatever, but he had a very robust exercise program that he was involved in before he flew on his second space flight. And when he returned to Earth after the mission, he was similarly involved in a rehab program getting back to his normal state of exercise. So there's no question that while space is a metaphor for aging, exercise and other countermeasures can help all of us as we get older. But metaphorically, what do we do as physicians? We admit 70-year-olds, 80-year-olds to the hospital. We put them in bed for 2 or 3 months,
Yes.
and then when it comes time to discharge them, we say, "How come you can't get out of bed and walk?" It's like taking an 80-year-old and sending them to Mars,
Yeah.
you know. So we need to think about what we're actually doing with these individuals.
I'd just like to build on something that Dave said there about how physiological similar the flights in space and aging are. Um, as I was an astronaut aboard the space station for 6 months, I was pretty religious about doing daily exercise. I spent an hour and a half exercising aerobically, but also muscle fitness as
Yes.
well. And now that I've been back on the earth for 15 years or so, I keep up with those same
You
exercises.
do.
The exercises that was prescribed for me to help ward off muscle wasting and bone demineralization are equally applicable to me and my geriatric age group today. So I do the exact same exercises at home almost every day as well. And it's clearly benefited me.
Yeah, and I think more and more. I mean, there's a growing market interest, but I think from my preventive medicine population health lens, there's also like the impact lens of how do we keep people as healthy as possible, as long as possible in the community, and both of what you guys are talking about. There's key ingredients of countermeasures or longevity measures that actually keep people healthy and well, and anti-aging as well. I mean, there's kind of school of thought of looking at aging as illness instead of aging as a natural thing that you can actually prevent it through bunch of measures. And again, that can also be quite precise as we get into technology behind it too.
Victoria, just before we leave the technology
Yes.
topic, I'd just like to mention one other big advent in terrestrial as well as space medicine, and that is artificial intelligence.
Definitely.
And we really see it moving into medical diagnostics today, and particularly in the space sector. I don't know if you're a Star Trek fan or not, but if you are, then you probably remember the tricorder that Dr. McCoy and Dr. Crusher used to help treat their patients. They would walk up to their patient and they would scan the patient with the tricorder, and immediately they get vital signs of physiological status and a suggested medical diagnosis as well, thanks to the AI that was part of it. Well, those medical tricorders from Star Trek, 23rd century, they exist today.
Yeah.
There's an X Prize competition that ran a few years ago. Several companies entered. They all did wonderful, including one Canadian company as well. So these tricorders that we thought are science fiction can diagnose 13 different core disorders, as well as provide info on vital signs. Think about what a tricorder would do in the hands of a nurse practitioner
Yeah.
up in a northern community.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be phenomenal?
Yeah.
Shouldn't this be something that we're investing in? So I'm excited about the advent of AI into medical diagnostics. I think it's really going to help us improve access to healthcare in some of the underserved regions of Canada.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think there's AI, Gen AI, and then potentially quantum that gets into future trajectory, and absolutely for vulnerable remote populations, but even improving accessibility of some of the health services more broadly, even where we are more urbanly located, because more and more maybe more like less expensive as well as more convenient and accessible diagnostics technologies are becoming so important to keeping people healthy and well in the community. Looks like Dave wanted to say something.
I think one of the challenges that we experience in terrestrial healthcare is whether or not we can actually access and use this technology. The rate of change in technology
Yes.
is exponential. There's two broad categories that are going to change the future of healthcare on Earth and in space: artificial intelligence, to Bob's point, and augmented reality as well. And you look at the Apple Vision Pro and this concept of a spatial computing immersive environment where now we can take three-dimensional photographs and three-dimensional videos and basically use the technology of a Vision Pro to teleport people from one location to another. The technology is changing so quickly. And years ago, our company, Leap Biosystems, we supported the first private Canadian astronaut in developing their payload. We demonstrated holo connection between mission control and the International Space Station, where we're basically beaming somebody up electronically to the US lab and beaming somebody down to mission control. Well, you look at where the Apple Vision Pro is with 4K reality in that technology, and it's changing so quickly that in the future, virtual psychiatry will become something that, and behavioral support will become something that we do as part of regular practice. In terms of, benefits, there's so many different applications and things that happen to us when we go into space. And Bob could speak to this quite well because he's the Canadian that's been in space the longest. But I will say from my perspective, especially when I was outside the space station doing a spacewalk, riding on the end of the Canadarm, this amazing icon of Canadian technology, and you look back at the planet, there's no borders that you can see from space that separate countries. And you orbit the planet every 90 minutes. Every 45 minutes you see a sunrise and a sunset.
Wow.
And to me, it's like we're living in a global village.
Yes.
And quite clearly, the COVID pandemic demonstrated many things to us, but it demonstrated to us that what happens in one part of our village affects the whole village. And we're seeing that in so many different ways, whether it's pandemics like COVID, whether it's climate change. So it really underscores the importance of a planetary perspective on the Earth and how we're treating our own planet and how we're living together as a species on Earth. I like to think that the human species is a spacefaring species, and we'll be going back to the moon and on to Mars and farther in this millennium. It's going to be absolutely incredible to see all these things happen. But more importantly, the lessons from space helps us understand how to live on our own planet.
Oh, that's beautiful. And I recall, Bob, you actually sharing very similar kind of heart-touching moment when you were out in outer space as well.
Yeah, I have a similar sentiment as Dave. There are certainly economic benefits to our Canada's role in the space program. In a typical year, the Canadian government invests about $350 million in the space program. But our Canadian space companies, not aerospace, space companies typically have revenues in the area of $4 or $5 billion a year. So right away, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
There are big economic reasons for us to participate in the space program. And a lot of our space companies, they sell to the export market in a big way. So that's a no-brainer. We talked a little bit about some of the scientific discoveries as well that come out of the space program when we work aboard a spacecraft, a space station that operates in a weightless environment where there's no density differences, no convection currents, no sedimentation, no buoyancy. You can do some pretty startling research in that environment. But I agree 100% with Dave. Reflecting on my space career at the end of my career, I think the most important parts of investing in the space program are the intangible benefits. And it's, what Dave said a few minutes ago, is talking about a world with no borders. It's about inspiring the next generation of students, of the next generation of leaders to consider educational paths and careers in STEM. And then it's inspiring our leaders and the public as well to take on audacious challenges. Certainly there's all kinds of social challenges out there that are worrisome to us, but I really think that the 1960s, when several people walked on the moon, that really encouraged humanity. I lived through that, and we all sort of thought that, if we really focus a lot, if we train enough, we can do anything. And I really look forward to seeing, Jeremy Hansen fly to the moon next year. I really think that it's going to be inspiring for the school children and also for the public to say, if Jeremy can do that, then we can attack some of these healthcare challenges, or we can attack climate change, or we can attack daycare or dental care. So I think that the intangible benefits of the space program are just as important as the tangible benefits.
You're absolutely right, especially in today's world where it feels very polarized and divided, and we have these very significant collective challenges ahead. There's nothing like that kind of two people walking on the moon, as you said, or we can achieve so much together. Nothing is impossible, as you framed. So it gives us that hope that sometimes I think we lack in today's dialogue.
You know, globalism is not a threat to nationalism.
Hmm. Well said and clearly articulated. And as you guys were talking about your experiences and seeing our Earth from outer space, I can kind of have a visual in my mind of what it looks like. But I'm just curious about, like, you trained many years to get out there. What was it like in terms of your feeling? Like, how did it feel being out there? Maybe I'll start with Dave.
You know, the first time you lift off to go into space, when you arrive in space, eight and a
Yes.
half minutes after leaving the launch pad, you
Yeah.
pinch yourself and you go, wow, I'm an astronaut. This is so cool. And
Yeah.
it's more the experience of looking out the window.
Yes.
And for me, when you're looking out the window back at the planet, being able to listen to music is something that really makes it a memorable experience. So I listened to Vivaldi's Four Seasons, Louis
Uh,
Armstrong, What a Wonderful World, John Lennon's Imagine. And if I listen to that music today, it takes me instantly back to space.
and Bob, anything that you'd like to share?
Similar. I also can remember my very first view out the window on my first flight, and this wave of emotion came over me. And talking about it right now, I that same wave of emotion comes over me. I was looking out the window. We were over the Atlantic Ocean. The sun was glinting off the ocean. Beyond the ocean, I could see the curve of the Earth's horizon, and then beyond the Earth's horizon was nothing but inky black space.
Oh,
And so I guess the thought that came to me was, this is a fulfillment of a childhood dream to fly in space. I'm actually in space. I'm testing my abilities and my energies on an international stage. I'm working with the best people of the world. The astronauts are all, as you said a minute ago, Victoria, they're all very well trained and
yes.
pretty commendable people to have a privilege to work with. And then the best organizations in the world, organizations that are not risk averse, that wish to take on bold, risky endeavors, but then manage those risks. So NASA
Yep.
and the Canadian Space Agency and other agencies like that. And it's a real privilege to be able to work in that kind of a setting. So whenever I review some of the photos or some of the videos of my past missions, I see me with big goofy grin on my face,
Yeah.
just having a great time, and it just all comes back, and just think, Bob, you are one lucky guy.
Yeah, well, it's surreal even just hearing your descriptions, both from you, Bob and Dave. And yeah, I think it's one of those things that, again, very few people have the privilege of being able to do. And after doing that, Dave, I think you went back into healthcare after retiring from that specific career. I'm curious about why.
I went back as a hospital CEO. In fact, I was
Oh,
the
you
CEO
did.
at South Lake Regional Health Center in
Okay.
Newmarket. Yes, so we've had very similar careers in that way. But to me, healthcare is the most meaningful thing I've ever done in my life.
Mm,
And flying in space, amazing. It's an incredible experience.
yes.
But when I fly in space, I'm not actually there for people and their families in their times of need, and doing what all the team members are doing at Fraser Health, and all the remarkable things that healthcare providers across our country are doing on a day-to-day basis. And I think that for me was one of the reasons why I went back to healthcare and enjoyed the experience of being a hospital CEO for about 7 years.
Hmm. And Bob, did your time in space also change your perspective on how we make decisions, like from health system or care provider perspective?
Yeah, so when I retired from the Canadian Space Agency, I also went into healthcare innovation. I worked for a couple of years with the Canadian Institutes for Health Research. And to answer your question, yeah, I think there's certain attitudes, certain mindsets that we develop in being astronauts that I think benefit other professions as well. So the use of checklists, the use of procedures, simulation. if you give me enough simulations on a skill that I need to acquire, I will acquire it. And I really wish that the same degree to which astronauts train and simulate for the unexpected would be developed and incorporated into healthcare, in particular in public healthcare as well. I look at the most recent pandemic, COVID-19, and there were several healthcare jurisdictions which leaped into the challenge and did a wonderful job putting measures in place.
Yes.
But Victoria, there were several that did not.
Yeah.
And some of those leaders, to me, they looked like they were tenuous in their decision making. They weren't really sure what the primary goal was here. And I was just sort of thinking to myself in the early days of COVID, if only those people, those healthcare teams, could have been battle hardened in simulations prior to this. The next pandemic may not, the next world crisis may not be another pandemic. It could be something different. And I really think an important part of leadership training, of management training, is to prepare for contingencies. And the astronaut kind of preparation for contingencies I see as could have great benefit in some of these other professions as well. It's pretty unlikely that next year we're going to have an asteroid impact, or we're going to have another pandemic, or that we're going to have a major earthquake or a Category 5 hurricane, but it is going to happen someday, and it's going to have just as devastating impact as what COVID had for us, and we need to be ready for that. And so those are some of the astronaut skills, some of the astronaut traits that I think that would benefit other professions on Earth.
Yeah, that's a really good point. What can we learn from the kind of the training and learning journey that astronauts undertake, that we can learn more from system perspective and as leaders as well? I guess in a way, even though we had the pandemic as a huge global crisis, we also had thereafter 1 in 1,000-year heat dome event, 1 in a 500-year I think flooding event, all these wildfires and heat events that are continuing. And then we recently just had CrowdStrike IT outage. So all of those combined, it just does seem like more and more we do have emergencies that we need to be prepped for, and very much using some of the methodologies that are more systematic that we can actually leverage from what you've shared from today.
Well, astronauts believe that the best way to manage a crisis is to manage crises, and we do that through simulation. And,
yes.
So there's room for it in other walks of life as well.
In fact, Victoria, we could have a whole hour discussion on this topic alone.
Yes.
At Southlake, we implemented, when I was CEO at the hospital, we implemented simulations. We would do a simulation usually once every year or so. We talk about readiness. Are we ready to deal with whatever it is? So we would do readiness reviews, again, something similar that we do in the space program. And I'll just finish by saying the lessons for the future are written in the past. The COVID pandemic was the 7th global pandemic that I've experienced in my career as a physician. The lessons aren't new. They're out there. We know what to do. The challenge is remembering what we did and learning from the past experiences.
Well said. And I'm going to ask you, from astronauts' viewpoint, given what you've seen from outer space and how our planet look from outer space and how special it is. And one of the areas that we hear about that's consistently been proven by evidence is that the biggest threat that we have for human health, population health now, is our changing environment and the damage that our Earth is weathering. Well, what do you think that we should do or could do differently from that view of planetary health, from what you've seen from outer space, as well as from your current and past experiences, Dave?
Well, I'll start quickly, and then Bob, maybe you can give a perspective as well. I think It's important for us to adopt the phrase planetary stewardship, to recognize that we do, as the human species, want to be good stewards of our own planet. And
Yeah.
what does that actually mean? It means caring for the planet. What are the economic incentives for us to do the right thing in caring for the planet? Because often, if you explore the economics of whether or not doing the right thing is economically feasible, it's not sustainable. So we have to not only think about what we need to do from a sustainability perspective for the planet, we also have to look at the economic viability of being able to do that as well. And there are solutions. You know, it's really exciting to see Toyota coming out with a hydrogen engine hybrid, because of course that's the direction for the future. So I'm actually very optimistic that we will find these economically appropriate incentives for people to do the right thing, to take care of our planet and the environment, and hopefully mitigate some of the global climate change that we're seeing.
Well, I agree with Dave. You know, I'm a tech geek. That's my background. So I think that there are some important policies that need to be put in place, and I'll have other leaders take care of that. But I really think that investment in innovation is really going to be important. As Dave said, there are innovations out there. There are some technologies out there that we need to develop, get them off the lab bench, and implement them on a global planetary scale. But we can't just invest a little bit. Climate change is a big issue. It's going to take billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars, and we have to be ready. Our governments have to be ready to up the amount of funds that we put into R&D to attack this and other important issues.
Great. Well, last question for you. What is one word that you would use to describe the future of space exploration?
I would say very exciting, which is 2 words, but if you want one word, exciting. And remember, this is the millennium in which the human species will become a spacefaring species. We will see humans living on Mars within the next 50 years or so. That will be the beginning of human exploration of our solar system, and this will happen. And I think it's so incredible that we've been fortunate to be part of this.
Well, I'm going to say international. And the reason why I say that is that everything that I have done in my career as an astronaut has been done across international borders. You know, for example, in the space station program, the 6 spacefaring agencies that came together to build and operate the space station were formerly Cold War enemies. And I really see that if we can go forward and explore the moon, explore Mars, maybe the ice moons of Jupiter and Saturn, as an international endeavor, and in a collaborative and coordinated fashion, I think that would really do an awful lot for a lot of the terrible geopolitical stuff that's going on in the world right now. So, and I really think that, as Dave mentioned a minute ago, we're not Canada, the United States, China, Russia, North Korea. We're one global community, and if we're going to survive together on this planet 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now, we're going to do it because we're one humanity. So my word is international.
Join us next time as we continue to get to the heart of healthcare. Don't forget to rate and subscribe to this podcast. The Heart of It is produced by Fraser Health Communications and Public Affairs.